Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome you to the Future Sustainability Expert Talk of Tagesspiegel Background Sustainable Finance, and I thank our partner WWF. The financial sector plays a decisive role in shaping our economy by providing necessary support to companies across all industries and to finance the transformation to a net zero, nature positive, and socially inclusive economy. However, with the escalating environmental and social challenges like human rights abuses and destroying of ecosystems, there arise questions if there's enough regulation for financial institutions. And the regulations undertaken by the European Union since 2018 to demand European financial institutions to identify and address sustainability-related risks within their portfolios, are they appropriate? We experienced just now a very intensive discussion and a political tug of war, especially concerning the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, CSDDD or CSDDD. It just enters the final stage of political negotiation. Tomorrow will be the next trilogue of European Parliament, EU Commission, and the European Council of Ministers. Therefore, we'll discuss today with high-profile speakers from politics, science, civil society, and the financial sector how the trilogue is progressing, what role the financial sector should play or not in an effective directive, and how its integration could take place. On the one hand, the CSDDD stands as opportunity to establish a comprehensive framework for more informed and responsible financial and entrepreneurial practices. On the other hand, there are some highly controversial points, and even the EU member states are divided on that. First, the scope of the directive, only big companies or smaller ones as well. Secondly, whether companies will face civil liabilities if they fail to implement the obligations. Third, whether companies will be required to establish and realize climate transition plans. And fourth, whether the financial sector should be included in the directive as a whole, partly, or not at all. We will look at this last point. There are strong voices against integrating the financial sector, especially from France, but also voices against excluding it. Hundreds of companies, including multinationals, support the CSDDD. And not only them, there are several coalitions of financial institutions and companies calling for requirements to be applied to the entire spectrum of risks and external impacts across the full value chains of all companies, including financial institutions. Besides institutions like foreign Nordic investors or the Dutch ABN AMRO Bank, there are even national and global financial initiatives engaging for this, like the Institutional Investor Group on Climate Change. We will now hear a keynote, then discuss a range of questions on the panel, and afterwards you can ask some questions to the panelists then. Coming to the overview on the negotiations on CSDDD. This was made by Sébastien Godineau. He has worked in the environmental sector for over 18 years and is currently chief economist of WWF European Policy Office and head of the Sustainable Finance Unit. His area of expertise lies in public and private finance, corporate reporting, and the wider issue of sustainable economy. He is leading a program aiming at EU sustainable finance policies to integrate sustainability requirements. Sébastien, the floor for the next 5 minutes is yours.
Thanks a lot. Thank you very much, and welcome to everybody and to the panelists. So we stand at a historic moment now. Tomorrow, the European Council, Parliament, and Commission will meet again for what is potentially the final meeting to agree the text of the CSDDD. That's potentially the end of a 4-year legislative process where the overarching aim has always been the same, which is to establish a meaningful and effective law for two things. On the one hand, to help prevent, minimize, eliminate environmental harm and human rights violations stemming from corporate activities, and on the other hand, create a legal framework supporting companies in making better informed, responsible decisions aligned with stakeholder expectations. But tomorrow's meeting has still quite a few critical issues to solve. One of these issues is the transition plans, climate transition plans and targets, where the negotiators have the groundbreaking opportunity to decide whether companies in the EU would not only have to disclose climate plans, but actually take concrete steps to mitigate climate change. But maybe potentially the most sensitive issue politically in these negotiations now, where our focus lies today, is the inclusion of the financial sector. Although the directive aims to establish a common standard for the entire EU, it's still unclear whether the law will properly apply to the financial sector. There are many questions still up in the air. The views of the EU negotiators on these issues diverge significantly. On the one hand, the Parliament advocates for comprehensive coverage of the entire financial sector, including banks, insurers, institutional investors, and asset managers, as well as their activities. And to make the law proportionate to these different actors, the Parliament has put a strong emphasis on the risk-based approach, allowing companies to prioritize and focus on the impact and intervention that are most relevant to their context. The European Commission, on its side, included the entire financial sector in its legislative proposal. However, the Council, representing the Member States, has moved from bad to worse. Last year, in its general approach, it agreed to make it optional for Member States to decide if to have financial sector due diligence included for banks and insurers only. But a few weeks ago, it went backwards and revised its position to decide to exclude the entire financial sector overall. However, as mentioned, the Council is heavily split. There's no secret that there's fierce opposition of financial sector inclusion led by France, for reasons which I'm forced to say I have yet to understand, because it seems rather dogmatic. On the opposite, there are many member states, including Netherlands, Denmark, Finland, Germany, Ireland, and more, advocating for the inclusion of the financial sector to benefit from the due diligence rules. In terms of the WBF position, our support to the inclusion of the financial sector might be obvious, but there is more than that. Last week, there was a list of around 50 statements issued in the last 2 years supporting the inclusion of the financial sector in the CSDDD, not only by hundreds of civil society organizations, hundreds also of financial institutions, of industry representatives, of non-financial companies, of academics, and also a trade union representing over 1 million financial sector workers in Europe. In particular, I think it's important to highlight that the statements from the finance industry make it clear that financial sector due diligence on sustainability is already a prevalent market practice in Europe, and that mainstreaming it through a law supports the individual firms and the market as a whole. There was also recently a support for including the financial sector in CSDDD by the European Central Bank. So what are the arguments against this inclusion? Is there room to find a middle ground and have a law that is workable for all financial actors? So that's what should be discussed today. And last word, I hope this discussion with the panelists today will help inform negotiations taking place tomorrow, which critically should help agree a final deal that will benefit people, businesses, and planet. Thank you.
Thank you, Sébastien. I just have a question. Why are some member states willing to exclude the financial sector? Is there any rationale?
Well, we have been hearing two broad things. One is that it would not, it would impede the competitiveness of the financial sector. Well, this is notably what we hear from France. Well, frankly, we don't understand this issue because it is notably about the competitiveness of French banks compared to other banks. But if it is an EU legislation, it applies to all European banks. So that would apply equally to French banks, Spanish banks, German banks, and other EU banks. So this, in our view, is not really relevant. Another argument we hear is that some places want to become the new city now that London, I mean, the English city is out of the UK, I'm sorry, out of the EU. And they try to shield the financial sector from any additional sustainability obligations. But this is also equally inconsistent in our view, as I mentioned. There's already a very large number of large financial institutions already having their own internal due diligence processes. And not only they already have this in practice, but in addition, many of them make clear that this is benefiting their activities by reducing their sustainability-related financial risks and helping them to accompany the clients or the investee companies. However, what needs to be discussed is how this should apply for different types of financial investors, notably banks, which have contractual links with their clients or insurers, or how this could apply to asset managers or institutional investors, which in practice may be implemented in a different way. So that would be interesting to discuss today.
There's just another question I have. There's so much regulation for financial institutions. Wouldn't this industry be overloaded by integrating the sector into the CSDDD?
Well, obviously, given the huge amount of harm that the European financial institutions are still contributing to by their financial support and different service activities, obviously there is still something missing in the EU regulatory framework. Different people say, well, this is already covered by reporting obligations, for example, under CSRD and SFDR. SFDR being a disclosure obligation applying specifically to investors. However, these reporting obligations, as their name says, only apply to reporting issues. So financial institutions, they are required to report what they already are doing. But if they don't have any due diligence process, they are not required to set up the due diligence process in the first place. So this does not cover this gap. And the other thing we are hearing is on the side of the prudential rules for sustainability-related financial risks, capital requirements for banks and for insurers. This is only applying, as I mentioned, to the financial risk side and not to the impact side. This is not. This is another type of materiality. And what is required is that the double materiality is covered so that the financial sector has obligations both on the impact side, so the negative impact they may create for the people and planet, and also on the financial risk side related to sustainability-related financial risks. Both need to be covered. Right now, only one is partly covered, and the impact side is not properly covered by EU regulations.
Okay, thank you. So now we will come to the panel to discuss the role of the CSDDD and the role of the financial sector. It's a pleasure for me to introduce to you the panelists. René Repasi is member of the European Parliament since 2022 for the parliamentary group S&D and professor of law at the University Erasmus in Rotterdam. In Parliament, he is a member of the Committee on Internal Market and Consumer Protection, as well as deputy member of the Committees on Economy and Currency, Econ, and Law. He is one of the negotiators of the CSDDD. Welcome, René. Isabella Ritter is EU Policy Officer at Share Action's Brussels office, one of the leading NGOs in the field of responsible investment. Educated in Italian and European law, she holds experience in the NGO sector, consultancies, and European institutions. She has followed the CSDDD legislation right from its beginning, besides working on other files of the Sustainable Finance Regulation agenda in Brussels. Welcome, Isabella. Alexander Schall is Professor of German, European and International Private and Corporate Law and Law Comparison at Leuphana University Lüneburg. His research focus is sustainability in corporate law, the laws of restitution, and human rights compliance in companies and supply chains. He has just published, together with other experts, a commentary book on the German supply chain law on corporate due diligence. Welcome, Alexander. When preparing this panel, we invited numerous German financial institutions, investor groups, and big financial associations, and they all rejected. Is this a bit astonishing as it concerning the future of sustainability management in the financial sector? But perhaps they are too busy with other things. We have now the COP28, or that they don't dare to comment the CSDDD. We don't know. But one said yes. It's Michael Schmidt. He is Managing Director of the Green and Sustainable Finance Cluster Germany and Senior Advisor to the board of the asset manager Lycon. Earlier, he had high-level functions at Deka Investment, Union Investment, and was member of the European High-Level Expert Group on Sustainable Finance, HLEC, of the European Commission. Today, he's honorary member of the Sustainable Finance Council of the German government and board member of the German Asset Manager Association, DWFA. The following discussion will have two parts. First, the role of the financial sector for corporate sustainability due diligence, and second, the role of the CSDDD for financial sustainability due diligence. Afterwards, as I said, you can ask questions. You can write them in Slido on the right-hand side. Please mention then the person who should give the answer. In Slido, you can also assess questions from others which you find important. Put then a thumb up so that those questions will be answered first. Coming to the role of the financial sector for corporate sustainability due diligence. René, MEPs are apparently under intense pressure from some actors in the business and financial sector to reduce the directive's scope and stringency. Can you confirm that?
Well, I can definitely confirm this, but I am under pressure since the moment I took over the rapporteurship of Econ's opinion on the role of financial services in the CSDDD. So in that sense, I'm used to that sort of pressure. Yet what we currently see is that there's pressure now not only coming from the financial sector, but not from member states' governments. I mean, the council was ganging up to say that the financial sector should not only be optional, so what they said last December, but completely excluded. So, and that is, of course, the most impactful lobby for the financial sector that there is. If the council says, well, we want to have the financial sector out.
Mm-hmm. So which role has the financial sector to play concerning corporate sustainability due diligence in your view?
Look, for me, this is really core to the whole CSDDD. We just heard that that this CSDDD is about acting. It's not about having another report. That's the reason why it fits in the already existing regulatory framework. The issue that we have here is things on the ground will be changed by real economy operators, not by finance, but it's finance that runs the world. So what are real economy operators afraid of if they do not implement their acting obligations? Market surveillance authorities, rather unlikely because they're understaffed and it's not really, they don't really have to be afraid to be properly checked. Civil liability, yes, this is certainly better than what we currently have in Germany, but given the issues of proof and the lack of a reversal of burden of proof in the CSDDD will make it less hurtful than some currently expected. And that makes it that real economy operators being afraid to lose their loan agreement or to lose a payment of the next loan tranche, that is going to make them to actually follow up on their due diligence obligations. Hence, finance is in the core of making the CSDDD to work.
Mm-hmm. Isabella, what do you think? What is more important, the influence of financial institutions on companies or the regulations on companies, of companies?
So I think one doesn't exclude the other, and one is more important than the other. In fact, both are highly interlinked. And so we shouldn't say one is more important than the other or either or. And yes, we need companies to be regulated, but we also, as Mr. Ripazi has mentioned, we need to divert financial flows toward in that direction. So we need also the companies are supported in their transition. So, and therefore all market participants would benefit from a harmonized set of rules. And so it would be, we think it's very has a negative impact to see these things separate. There really needs to be a harmonized picture and not making these distinctions. And also we think, why should we ask from, for instance, from a smartphone producer to check on its mining companies where it gets the minerals from, and not from the investor that is, for instance, financing that smartphone producer.
Mm-hmm. Alexander, how effective would the CSDDD be in real economy if the financial institutions and their activities would be excluded in the CSDDD? Sorry, we don't hear you. Sorry, Alexander, we don't hear you. You have to.
I thought I was centrally. No, I am. As I said, it is difficult to make a prognosis. I would have loved to see more what is happening in Germany, where we have an obligation already that includes the financial institutions. But on the other hand, it is interpreted in a very narrow way. For example, the German law doesn't even really go down, doesn't make you control the activities of your customer. The supply chain on the downstream is very, there are loopholes. So maybe this already points to a bit of a compromise. So we cannot say that we have strong experiences on any impact on the financial sector. Going beyond that, what has already been said, that of course, even today, you would look at the dealings of your customer for reputational reasons and for sustainability reasons with every credit assessment. Maybe, just maybe, this is the best way to approach it, because I do see a material difference in the way that the producing companies can influence the supply chains, and the indirect influence a bank only has. It is more a gatekeeper function. We would not say that Volkswagen has a gatekeeper function. They are the main responsibles, whereas for the banks, we think all agree that it's about gatekeeping mainly. And this is a different content of what you would have to check in the end. So as I said, experiences, I don't have a crystal ball.
Yeah, of course. So then we ask Michael, as our financial expert from the real financial economy. So if the EU Trilog would exclude the financial sector in the CSDD, would it have anyhow an effect of financial institutions in a way that they would influence real economy?
Well, yeah, thanks for having me. And I would say yes, in fact, for two reasons. One is that the companies under the CSDD and CSRD are required to report about their various material sustainability factors in a double materiality sense, so that this has repercussions on their supply chain, their respective suppliers, and potentially also downstream on the clients. And with that, I will get, as an investor or financial industry participant, I'll get data in any ways from companies. I'll get reports about potential breaches, and so I can't ignore them. I can't ignore them for two reasons. First, it may have a value effect, a risk influence. And secondly, I myself, under the SFDR, the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulations, am already under obligation to report on principal adverse impact indicators, and also not only report, but increasingly so talk about how do I deal with them. Therefore, I'm sure that even without having the financial sector included in the CSDDD, it would have a clear impact on decision making and reporting of financial market participants. Maybe one important, I think one important point to make in this debate about including the financial sector, yes or no, is the financial sector is not one homogeneous entity. We have different actors that have different requirements, be it regulatory wise or from their business model function differently. A bank is not an asset manager. And an investor that has a fiduciary duty is not a bank that sort of has its own balance sheet as its own responsibility directly. So I think we need to understand and differentiate the business models when we talk about the financial sector. And secondly, we should also look at as to is it the obligation of the financial sector in their investee companies or the clients, or is it also the responsibility for themselves? And when I look at those distinctions, I would say, well, of course, the financial sector in itself should not breach, should not have a harmful impact in their supply chain, basically, as a company. But this is, of course, not the big point. The big point is, of course, how does the financial sector deal or is obliged to deal with the clients in a bank consideration or as an investor with the investee companies. And there we ought to consider what is already there as obligation in order not to complicate things or create inconsistencies. We have some inconsistencies already in the Sustainable Finance Regulation. The Sustainability Advisory Council of the German government has talked about those already. In certain respects, the SFDR review will highlight a few more, I think. So there is already a framework where investors in particular are obliged to look at human rights and environmental impacts also in the value chain. And there is, or therefore, as I said, because of the linkages to the valuation, to assessment of risk, and to their own reporting requirements, already, I think, quite some strong link for this CSDDD impacts on the financial sector as well.
Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, there are more and more reports by NGOs and partly by scientists that big, let's say, destroyings of ecosystems or human right abuses are made by banks and insurers and investors. So independent from their business model, they are mixed into that. So wouldn't it be good to have the same rules for everybody laid down in the CSDDD?
Well, I'm a big supporter of level playing fields, certainly. But I just hesitate basically to come up with yet another obligation that comes in the similar direction as we have already partly in place. I think it's also about reinforcement. And in the end, it's not the financing itself. It is, of course, what's happening on the ground. I'm with Alexander Schall on this. It is a different role of a supplier or a company that has a supplier to this is a direct business relationship, a contractual relationship that has direct impacts as a result in the real economy, the financing. To give the financing is a responsibility, and I'm not saying that financial decision makers should ignore the impacts they potentially create by giving money to certain projects that have a harmful impact. But as the companies are under the CSDD obliged to observe those rules, and will be also fall under civil liability, and there's according to the draft or the proposal by the Commission, there's also a supervisory authority plan, so there will be capacity to also check. I think, therefore, the financial institutions will necessarily, and if they are right in their minds, will ask companies as to those questions that are asked to the companies potentially as a violator of the CSDD.
Sebastian said that there are not enough obligation for the financial sector to really address, not only to be transparent on some things, but to address such social and ecological challenges. So René, the question to you, what do you think, which role can the CSDD play in making the financial sector more sustainable, or how would it impact the sector? Where do you see the exact points to make a change, or to help the financial industry, perhaps?
Naja, let me put it like this. It is indeed very right to say that there are, in let's say, hard law term, not enough rules out there. But if you look at the OECD soft law that we have, and the guidelines that we have here, or the guidance that we have here for institutional investors, this is quite a document that makes very clear what institutional investors could all do in order to trigger change, and not by writing just another report. Honestly, the world is not waiting for another report by a financial service provider. What the world is waiting for is that they finally act. That if they see that they are financing a project in Latin America that is leading to groundwater being completely polluted, that they take out the plug and continue financing this because this particular company is not changing its course of action. That is precisely what the world expects from financial actors. Now, there is soft law on this, but there is no hard law on this. And that is precisely what at least Parliament's position on the CSDD wanted and still wants to achieve. Because Michael is totally right, the Commission proposal was rather unclear in that. But we included a rule on engagement policies that makes clear what are actually the obligations of investors. And we do already have them. I mean, you didn't get any German banks here on this panel, but if you had asked Dutch ones, you would have the large ones like ABN AMRO and ING being here present and saying something, because they do it. But they are, in the big concert of all financial service providers, still rather big for their country and probably also big for European standard, but they are rather small if you look at shareholder meetings. If now we have a CSDD that requires from their partners in investments to also engage in a shareholders meeting with the course of action by a company, then they are not a sole voice anymore, but being broader, and that is that will bring change about. So that is what the CSDD is about, and therefore it is right that we need tailor-made rules, because finance and the influence of finance is different than the real economy one. But there is certainly a lack of rules for the financial sector.
You mentioned the Dutch. End of October, 3 Dutch associations of pension funds, insurers, and banking issued a common letter to the EU legislators asking for the financial sector to be included in the CSDD. Why is there, Michael, perhaps you can give the answer, why is there nothing comparable coming from the German financial communities? Are the Dutch wrong, or don't dare the German taking position?
Well, I can't possibly speak for the whole financial industry of Germany. I'm not a representative of one of the classic associations. We are, as a green and sustainable finance cluster, aiming at a cross-sectoral, across the financial industry, ambitious work on how to promote sustainable finance, how to achieve sustainable finance standards. We have, to be honest, not discussed with our sponsors and members the positioned on the CSDDD. So I can't basically give you the position of the whole sort of sponsorship cross-cutting membership. But what I would say is there is certainly maybe a more fragmented financial industry perspective in Germany, and therefore there may be not as clear a statement from all sectors.
They are too shy.
Well, I think there is a bit of a hesitation, as I said, from when we looked at the coherence and consistency of the EU Sustainable Finance Framework at the Sustainable Finance Advisory Committee, that those rules first of all need to be worked on, and we need to have experience on that, and we need consistency, and there are some inconsistencies, and I'm not sure whether implementing it in the CSDDD will help the cause. I can understand totally the criticism on certain financing that leads to breaches and all, be it in governance or social matters or to environmental damage. This should not be the case. This should be stopped, and it should not. And of course, I'm with you, René. There is a responsibility by the financing body in the decision making to not allow for that, or to have this as in the decision making as part of their decision making. And I would also say this is for a good reason, without any regulation or hard law. This is simply because it is not good press. It is also not good business conduct and reputational positioning to do that when I get the reports on the harm that has been created by such financing decisions, especially if that has come through a process that did not try and have a due diligence in place at the decision.
Yeah, okay. But Alexander, there is for me a bit the point. What do you think? What could or should this directive play in the EU Sustainable Finance Regulatory Framework?
Well, thank you for putting this to me. I've been thinking when hearing René Passet and Franz Schmidt that maybe there's a compromise here. I would strongly hesitate to exclude project financing from the directive, because if you finance concrete projects, you have exactly that sort of impact that everybody thinks must be sanctioned by the due diligence. On the other hand, if you're just generally financing someone, well, then any sovereign debt would finance us all. And this cannot really bring about an obligation to control all our behavior. So this is understood by everyone. So if we think about general business financing, maybe it's enough to check the compliance systems like a gatekeeper, like the auditors. And if I had to write an exception, I would draw exactly that line, because I think the reluctance of the financial sector is really what we saw with these suits about the policy of Shell in the Netherlands and in London, very different judgments, by the way, and very much debate in academia. But I think banks are afraid at the end of the day that they should second guess when Volkswagen has to produce cars, or which motors to use. And this is the danger if you include them fully. On the other hand, you cannot, from my feeling, you cannot exclude project finance. That would be abysmal. So maybe this is a line we should consider. I put this to the debate.
Yeah, I give it to Isabella, also connected with the question. I mean, Michael explained a bit where are the limits of his sector, of the financial sector. But wouldn't the CSDDD bring the integration of the financial sector in the CSDDD, would it bring advantages for the financial sector? Would it bring opportunities for the financial market participants?
Yeah, thanks for this. Yeah, I would like to comment on a couple of points that have been also mentioned earlier, and also on the sustainable finance framework. I think it's really important to underline that the CSDDD would bring the much needed missing piece when it comes to due diligence, and to introduce, it would be the legislation to introduce a fully fledged due diligence process for financial institutions, because we have in the EU sustainable finance framework references to due diligence, but we don't have a fully fledged process in place. And this would be the unique opportunity to introduce such a behavioral obligation, first of all, and this is really important to underline, which has to be said is not an obligation of results, it's an obligation of means. And this is something which comes up very often in discussions, saying, yeah, then we have to deliver this and this. It's more about, as Mr. René has said, very like to set up and implement the process, to identify, to manage the risk, and also to use the leverage. And this is a really, really key point. And in terms also of advantages, you say, for the financial institutions, what we have here, I have heard a lot also from representatives of the industry, and that you already have mentioned, is that carrying out mandatory human rights and environmental due diligence really helps financial actors to already to identify and manage adverse impacts and risks, and also to meet the increasing demands from their clients and beneficiaries when it comes to sustainability. And for instance, as Herr Schmidt has said, yeah, there is already much in place, and there is risk management is already part of it's the daily bread of financial actors, but we don't have a structured process in place. And as you have said, if their rights in their mind, they would then act on the adverse impacts identified. But we see it from our reports and many other reports from NGOs, CSOs, and many other actors, that there are still financial actors that are not, unfortunately, right in their minds, and they are not acting upon the adverse impacts that they're identifying. And this is also what we have seen, that in our reports, for instance, that there are, as you say, many actors already aligning with the international standards. They're already carrying out key steps of the due diligence process. I'm thinking particularly about engagement, but it's not carrying out the full. We see there is a lack of consistency and structure and of carrying out the full due diligence process. And what we see, there we have many front runners, but also many latecomers. And so the CSDDD would be the key opportunity to introduce common minimum requirements and to set the much needed level playing field.
Michael, perhaps you could, we talked about the difficulties, we talked about the advantages. Are there really disadvantages if the financial sector would be integrated in this directive?
Well, first of all, there's of course a cost issue, because you would have to, in order to fulfill all the requirements, and some of them are not specific enough, would require probably more staff, because you need more analysis, because you are more liable yourself directly rather than indirectly through the companies that report to you. The question on the liability is one that is, I think, very, very essential as well, because how much can I be reliable for? What has my part of the action been to maybe cause the harm that is under question? Especially as Alexander Schall pointed out correctly, I might be financing the whole company. I don't know where the money always goes in terms of their investment. Same with some loans that are general loans that are not provided for a certain purpose. And to what extent would I then sanction, basically, would I have to sanction the company I give the financing towards? I've seen, of course, the proposal that says, well, it should not lead to bankruptcy, and it should be sort of a last resort to divest and so on. But I wonder where the line should be drawn, and I just fear that there may be actually conflicting signals, that the financing company basically feels obliged, because of being included in the CSDDD and their interpretation, perhaps, to actually put a higher cost or on the loan, or force the company to do things where basically the company itself may not have done it under the CSDDD. So there may be conflicting signals to the same around the same issue, just because of lack of clarity. And I just think that the direct one should, and I like Alexander Schall's proposal to look where do I have a direct impact. The most direct impact is the company itself, the supply chain of the company, certainly, because it affects the products and materials and so on. And the financing, the more direct the financing is, the more clearly I can actually look at the implications that are that because they are more specific, and they can actually then be looked at more clearly and more stringently. Whilst if I'm a fiduciary investor for someone else whose money I'm responsible for, to then provide a bond financing, so I buy the bond or I buy the equity, it is much more indirect, and therefore there could be costs in terms of efficiency that is not achieved. I think it's better to have it as a second step, in a second line, to have the financial industry.
René, I switch over to you because I mean these are concerns with certain founding and arguments. What could be good framing conditions to be integrated in the CSDDD so that the burden is not too big, or that the named disadvantages are limited? For example, focus on risk management systems and processes, or timely, later effective than for companies, so that the data are there if financial institutions would be obliged to do something.
The first question is here, what is the task of the legislator, and what is the question of the implementation? I mean, I think a disease of European legislation is that it, in some fields, which you can normally identify the amount of industrial lobbyists that are active in this field, you get immense, huge articles with multiple subparagraphs going in extreme detail. And then there are others where there are basically not that many pressure groups walking around, where we have a very general article, mostly in the version proposed by the European Commission. So this is a disease of EU legislation. And honestly, if we want to do good legislation, then we should refrain ourselves from being too detailed, because it creates trouble for all others. There might be a detailed case being subject by it, but for the rest, there's uncertainty whether by analogy these data apply to them or not. So in that sense, I think we should be clear in the set of obligations that we want to have financial institutions to do. The financial institutions is therefore they should act, not just another report. And they are institutional investors. We should take into consideration that by their disinvestment, nothing will change. But by their engagement, something will change. To make clear that their obligation to act is met if they engage in an engagement policy. That it is clear that if the real economy operator has not changed its course of action, it doesn't mean that engagement policy hasn't taken place. So that we basically are clear what are the set of obligations and when is a success met. I mean, this is precisely what the risk-based approach that the Parliament has engaged in wants to achieve. That there is a focus on those who are also being linked with a certain adverse impact on human rights and environment are doing something about it. But you are liable for the very fact when you contribute or cause an adverse impact. And by that, everybody is using the way of how they are part of this entire chain. Now, I can understand that a compliance department of a big financial service operator, the job of financial service providers is to do good investments. It's not to be top lawyers. So therefore, I understand that the compliance department of such financial service provider is getting a bit uncertain about due diligence obligations as long as it's not in M&A. So that therefore these compliance departments say, I don't know what to do, I'm uncertain, I'm afraid of the liability claim, so let's just kick everything out and then the world is fine. No, that's not how this works. And it also doesn't work that compliance departments are only happy, okay, we are in there, but then please give us down to the little comma what we have to do. It's also not how it works. So therefore, I think the approach the Parliament has taken to give a special set of obligations for financial service providers, but not to say down to the detail what they should do in order to actually meet those requirements is the right approach.
Mm-hmm. Before coming to the audience who has already some questions, I want to put a last question here in the panel. Even the United Nations Principles for Responsible Investment, a group of almost 4,000 investors and asset managers with trillions of assets under management, called for the financial sector to be included in the CSDDD. And Frank Ellison, member of the board of the European Central Bank, asked for the integration. So, Alexander, can regulators ignore that?
Regulators are sovereigns. You can ignore a lot of things. We saw this in the past. You can ignore scientists and wherever it leads you. I think we must be a little bit careful with these demands because it's one thing to make a moral high ground demand and another thing to implement it into hard law. And we see this in particular with the Lieferkettengesetz in Germany, which is a very moral high ground. I can really say for sure from all my experience that no company in Germany rejects the approach of the Lieferkettengesetz. Nobody wants to do business against it. That is not to say that everything we regulated in there and everything we interpret into it is correct and is the best approach. And I'm pretty much a warning voice against the more the merrier. We must bear in mind that, for example, Volkswagen has 2,600 subsidiaries alone. Half of them subject to the Lieferkettengesetz. Now, should the banks financing Volkswagen or even the financial institution and asset management have a due diligence to also check down all these subsidiaries? And I think that is the danger that is really on the horizon, and these best efforts, obligations, they are, or appropriate efforts. This is all very lax. At the end of the day, you will see that people will search just for another pocket to sue. And I'm not against the civil liability, far from. But if we impose civil liability, we should also remember of the basic principles that carry civil liability. And these are my own responsibility, my own control of the danger. Yeah. And as I said, project finance, I'm completely in. These other things, I'm not sure whether the general approach to credit assessment isn't enough, because that obliges you anyway to take into account the viability of the business model, the viability of the compliance systems, and all the obligations your business partner is under. So that is really my point of view. Maybe
but Alexander,
in the middle of that.
But Alexander, I didn't understood the CSDDD that a financial actor has to check the whole supply chain of Volkswagen, but to have risk systems, asset risk management systems in place. So I think that has to be clear. They don't have to go to any supplier wherever it is. But we will come now to the question on the floor. Sebastian, you just wanted to mention a short thing, or do we switch them?
To clarify a couple of things. Well, first on project finance.
Oh, sorry, very short, because we have many questions, please.
Yeah, sure. Just a reminder on project finance. Remember, project finance is only 4% of general finance. 96% is corporate finance. So I think it just doesn't work at all if you only include project finance, because you exclude, I mean, the huge part of this issue. And investors, banks, insurers are already equipped to deal with corporate finance or corporate financial services, because this is almost, I mean, this is really the big majority of the existing work. If also you only include some types of financial services or sectors and not others, you will create, you will heavily distort the market. You will create an unlevel playing field, which is what Michael Schmidt agreed should be avoided. And I think the only way forward for this is to include both corporate and project finance, and both investors, banks, and insurance. And the last element is, if you don't include the financial sector in due diligence, while you include European real economy companies, again, you risk distorting the level playing field with European companies and non-EU companies, because you allow the European banks, for example, to finance dirty companies that are not European ones, but they could not do the same with European companies. So there again, you distort heavily the market at the expense of European companies properly implementing their own due diligence obligations. That would be really, really problematic.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Sebastian. Now, the first question from the audience to René. Do you think that the due diligence obligations of the financial sector should apply to the value chain of their clients and not only those clients' direct operations, in order to cover impacts which are usually hidden upstream in the supply chain, for example, forced labor, deforestation?
That somewhat relates back to the discussion that we just had. So how far can a financial operator look into the value chain of the direct client? Honestly, my approach would be here a pragmatic one. It was also the one that the Econ Committee report took when we were looking at the value chain issue, that we do not limit ourselves simply to the direct client relationship, but that we look at the risks within the client's profile. At times, indeed, they can be hidden later in the stage, but we must also see what is feasible for the financial service provider to actually check on. So in that sense, I think we cannot have an approach that goes too down deep in the value chain in let's say the Volkswagen example we just had this discussion about. But at the same time, when you see that there is a real economy operator who has a construction site of a subcontractor in Xinjiang in China, everybody knows that there is forced labor. So in that sense, it's an obvious adverse human rights, adverse impact on human rights. It's a bit later in the value chain where you know you contribute to it by your financing. So it is something that you can raise in your dialogue with the company that you're talking to. And see how they react to it. So that would be my approach to this, and that's the approach that is, in legal terms, reflected by the Econ report.
The next question, there's no written to who should answer it. I just read the question, and then anybody who wants to answer can do this. The CSDDD would add specific action requirements for the financial sector for the first time. In view of the leverage effect and the financed impact on the environment and society, can there be any good reason at all to exclude the financial sector from the CSDDD? Who wants to give an answer? Alexander?
As said, it's our private law principles go back 2,000 years, and in the core they have worked very well. And one of these principles is that you're liable for your own conduct and not liable for the conduct of people at arm's length. And this is a reason to say that banks are not responsible for the general dealings in detail of their customers, and cannot be, otherwise they would have to interfere in a way that may be unwelcome for all sides. Which is not to say that in specific situations where you obviously you have also lawyers for the mob, yeah? We all know it, we all look Netflix. So these people need not to be exempt, but now we're talking about a general obligation for every bank, for every finance, for everyone giving money to someone other. And I'm a bit concerned that we get carried away from the good we can do and go too far and don't see the borders where these new principles lead us. So I take up the point, yes, if you finance some companies outside the supply chain acts or the CSDD, then also I would also agree. So my exemption needs to be redrawn a little bit. I can see that. But if you finance companies that are subject themselves to the CSDD, I do understand why you would exclude it. And also, please let me say this, and then I'm done. We're talking about a wide range of things. So human rights violations in the grassest examples, nobody wants them, and also we have a feeling how to avoid them. But how to be sustainable is a completely different question. I would refrain from making banks subject to an obligation to second guess or judge better than their client how to be sustainable, which would or could be the outcome of too strong of a due diligence obligation. So these are reasons why people don't want it without being evil or nasty or whatever. I said I'm a professor of law. I need to understand points of view. I'm not a politician, and I have my own feelings about this and that. Sometimes I have strong feelings, but here I think I'm a fair intermeddler.
Yeah, Isabella, you would like to react? Very short,
Yes.
because there are many other questions.
Yes, thank you. I will keep myself brief. I think what we should not forget is that what is the CSD about? It's about promoting responsible business conduct in the EU beyond. So it's not about immediately taking someone to court and suing them. It's really about upholding the standards for environmental protection and labor rights across the board. So if for instance, a financial actor identifies adverse impact in the client's activity, it's not that it's going to be sued straight away. No, the goal of it is that the financial actor does something about it, tries to use its leverage that, for instance, the company is doing something about this adverse impact. And we also, the current positions that are the negotiation table, they acknowledge that there is a different involvement of financial actors in an adverse impact. Like there is a differentiation, and in general also what we're having now on the table, the proposals on the table, they have a very nuanced approach for financial institutions. There is not the same as, for instance, Fabergus has pointed out, the value chain obligation is not as far for financial actors as for real economy players. So there is already a very proportionate and nuanced approach for financial actors on the table at tomorrow.
Okay, thank you. Michael, the next question is for you. We heard a lot from MS, I suppose that's member states, that EU is reaching its maximum ambition when it comes to EU unilateral environmental policies. Isn't the CSDD the perfect opportunity to create a harmonized engagement framework through our global supply chains for our global partner countries to also act?
Well, I guess that would be the mission and the wish behind it. I'm just doubtful that this will be the case eventually. I don't think we can realistically assume that because of the regulation from the EU that all parts of this world will follow suit. We haven't seen this in other ways. We have adaptations of sustainable finance regulation elsewhere. The taxonomy has been exported basically as a concept, but it has been adapted differently according to certain jurisdictions. So I'm just hesitant to assume that this would be the big lever. Europe, I'm certainly a proponent of Europe being on the forefront of a sustainable economic framework, some vision of a sustainable competitive industry and infrastructure, and therefore having a competitive advantage basically into the future because of going in the right direction for what is truly sustainable as business models going forwards. And this may have an effect on other jurisdictions to see that, oh, we actually have successful new business models, or we have earlier transformation business models. I just don't think that people assume this today already when looking at Europe from outside Europe. And therefore I consider that the effects directly fairly limited in that regard.
Okay, here comes another question for you. The lack of data is apparently not the only reason why banks and other financial institutions have not conducted sustainability due diligence in the past. The lack of guidance on a proper due diligence procedure has also been said to play a major role. Would the CSDD not help here?
Well, I think for financial players, there's a mechanism in place that would work actually without having it as a legislation. And this is the supervisory framework. We've got a macroprudential framework in place already, where sustainability risks are to be included in the business strategy, in the governance and the governance systems, and also in how to deal with risks in in the business lines of financial companies. So it's the Bundesbank, the BaFin, the ECB, and the Network for Greening the Financial System has come up with stress tests and suggestions as to how financial companies should actually integrate scenario and stress test analysis into their business frameworks. And it's through that leverage that a supervisory authority has, and hopefully through the global network of Greening the Financial System, which combines the central banks, many of the most important central banks, and also supervisory authorities in the financial sector together, to come up with a framework that actually is like Basel 2 or 3 or 4 has been put in place to sort of go directly into where it matters, and have the explicit talk in the supervisory meetings. I think this is something we have already in place, but one could use to actually achieve the same goals, and I would say even better than through including too many unclear requirements, and then also related to civil liability in the CSDDD, where it is the companies that should be in focus. And as I said, in second line, and you can do this through the supervisory regime. In the second line, the financial sector, whose responsibility I do not deny whatsoever. I just don't think it is the same. It is the best way through the legislature that is proposed.
Okay, thank you. We have only 3 minutes left. 2 questions to you, René, very shortly. At the beginning, a few words were spoken about climate goals and transition targets. What constitutes the revolutionary element of the CSDDD in this realm, and how would it be applicable to financial institutions? This is the first question. And the second, would the inclusion of financial services into this directive has any effects on non-EU companies?
Now, the second question, and we are still crystal balling, because tomorrow is the last trilogue, and nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. So on the basis of the positions that we have out there from Council, Commission, and the European Parliament, first, third country undertakings are covered by the scope. It's only a question of threshold. So if finance is in there, also third country finance would be in there. But in any event, third country real economy operators are in there. On climate, the original proposal has already foreseen the obligation to set up climate plans. And it is one of the strong proposals of the European Parliament to have those transition plans being stronger and more relevant. And given reluctance of France on finance and Germany on civil liability, I believe the biggest potential for the final deal in the trilogue lies actually to harden climate and transition obligations. And then ultimately what it means for finance depends on whether finance is in or out.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so to wrap up, last questions, and you answer please with yes or no. To wait with the integration until a review, would this undermine the possible effects on the CSDDD and the real world economy? Yes or no? Alexander Schall.
It
Yes
depends,
or no?
but
it depends. Okay, Isabella Ritter.
Yes, it would definitely undermine the effectiveness of the CSDD, because such a review clause would.
Okay.
We don't have the luxury of time to wait for such a review clause.
Michael.
It would probably undermine, because we see it with the SFDR now, that the review actually stalls the development rather than helps it.
Okay. Sebastian, yes or no?
It would distort the implementation.
René Repasi.
Yes, full stop.
Yes, full stop. So we could discuss much longer, but our time is over. And we will see what the outcome of tomorrow's trilogue, and certainly Tagesspiegel Background Sustainable Finance will report about the outcome and the reaction from different industries. I thank you very much, the panelists, to have participate here and to give your views on this subject, and the auditorium. I thank you very much for your attention and for your questions. I wish you a good evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.